Okay, perfect. Thank you. Again, hello everyone and welcome to our Spring 2023 Professional Practices Series. I'm going to start with a visual description of myself in case you have anyone with low vision participating tonight. So I'm a I don't know who I am, but that's really hard. I haven't thought about that. But I'm a black hair, brown skin, young woman. I'm wearing a knitted sweater with very muted colors. And I'm sitting in MFA classroom. And yeah, that's it. So. And let's start with a land acknowledgement. Before I introduce our speakers tonight and begin this event, I want to respectfully acknowledge that the land we are occupying in Minneapolis is unceded territory, the ancestral homelands of Dakota and Anishinaabe people. Gathering here, we pay our respects to the elders, both past and present. We acknowledge the grave harm that colonialism brought to these lands, and in particular, the erasure of both indigenous and African identity, not only under slavery, but via racist laws that have segregated all people. We honor those who have lived and do live now at these intersections of identity and experience. If you would like to learn more about land acknowledgements, please screenshot this slide and visit the website listed. So I'm going to stay here for a few more seconds if you want to take a screenshot. So I think that's enough for a screenshot. Let's move on. And this event is sponsored by the MCAD MFA program, which is a community of makers, thinkers, researchers, and creative professionals working in a mentor-based interdisciplinary environment. And just some notes. Make sure your video audio will be muted for this webinar. If you experience any technical difficulties, please email us at avsupport@mcad.edu. And please feel free to leave questions in the chat and we will select from the submissions after our speakers have presented. And let's say some thank yous to our support staff, Kylie Van Noot, Senior Administrative Assistant, and Nikki Motekallem, Administrative Assistant, as well as Bob Caldero in AV support, and Shefrin, our TA assistant AV tonight. So tomorrow, next week, the same time, Wednesday, 6:30 to 8 p.m., we have another event, Visa for Artists. We're going to have a guest lawyer with Sherwin Abachi, and the talk will go on with 3 panelist artists, Pengwu, Duisenel, and Jiao Hanma. So if you are an international student or artist, or you know anyone who might be interested in this, just spread the word. You can find the Zoom link and info on our Instagram page and on our social media. So I think it's time to go ahead and introduce our speaker. So tonight we have Randy Walker here. He was generous to join us tonight and share his experience with us. Randy Walker makes his living as a full-time public artist based in Minneapolis. Randy has won grants, including the Public Krasner Foundation grant, a Magnite Mid-Career Public Artist grant, and 5 Minnesota State Arts Board Artist Initiative grants. Randy creates commissions for public agencies around the country. Before turning to art, Randy studied architecture at the University of Oregon, during which time he studiously avoided any courses associated with the term professional practices. So I'm really curious to know about that. So I'm going to share my screen and let Randy share his screen.
Well, thank you, everyone, for having me back. And I wanted to start off to be an interesting evening of discussion. That's how I envision it. Just kind of taking off on the introduction that Ziva was kind enough to read. It's true that I did not want to go to any class or seminar that had to do with professional practice when I was in architecture school. I did have to. There were some that I couldn't avoid. They were required, and I did what I had to do to get through them, but I really didn't get anything out of them. I don't know, not that they're bad, they were bad courses, but I was really more interested in architectural design, theory, anything, but my mind was not, I was not interested in how the profession is run on a daily basis. And architecture is much more of an established profession than art, right? There's actually some structure to it, and there's ways it's been done, and there's protocols and so on and so forth. So, but here we are in art, and here all of us are. I didn't stay with architecture. I turned to art, and eventually I had to confront what professional practice meant in terms of being an artist. So I'm hoping that my experience has some relevance in your lives or your careers, but I wanted to, seeing as how my memory was so poor going to these professional practice things, I wanted to get a quick sense from whoever would like to volunteer. What is your, first of all, is this required, or are you here on your own free will? Free will. Okay, well, that's interesting.
Destiny.
Yes. And then the next thing I would like to get a sense of is, it's kind of spelled out here in this first slide, just by the business of art, the art of business, just to mix these two ideas into one sentence, or, use this art and business, or I suppose you could say the profession. These are often contradictory things, and one smacks of kind of, I don't really, it's antithetical to art. Art is pure. I'm sure you're all passionate about art, and it's, I think that's something similar with architecture. I think there are a lot of differences with architecture and art, but I know that that's one thing that's similar, is that people are passionate, and they're not going into it because it's it's a reasonable, rational thing to do. And it's a way to make a decent living, and it's honorable, and there's something more going on than that. Is my suspicion. So I was wondering, part of what I hope to do here is to bridge the gap between this pure art world and this bad business idea, or this boring business, or whatever it is, if maybe it's not tainted to you, but is there a divide to you? Does that ring true with anyone? Do you see these as disparate things? Yes. Okay. I'm also really interested too. It's pretty basic, but I'm interested in how have you guys, have any of you thought about how you might make a living? Once this is all done.
Every day.
What was that?
Get a real job.
Get a real job. And which I assume is different than art.
Mhm.
Anyone else?
I think there's a way to make money making art.
Okay.
Clearly, we're here for a reason.
Okay.
Local says, teaching the art.
Teaching, good, good, good. Anyone else?
I want to make stuff and get paid for it.
Make stuff and get paid for it. Okay, excellent. So again, to bring architecture back into it. If anyone had asked me that when I was in school, that I would be like, yeah, I want to be an architect. Yeah, I want to make a living doing architecture. And so I want to go into an office. I want to start my own office. I want to be, you know, designer architect, making these amazing structures. And there's a whole system set up for that. There's a whole culture for that, starting in school. And you can follow a path, number of paths that are pretty clearly defined. So we've just kind of touched on a few. Some people have there's vague ideas of wanting to make it as an artist somehow. There's ideas of doing something that really makes money and then doing art. There's an idea of maybe balancing the two with something that's art related and also teaching. So there are these different ideas on what to do. But one thing's for sure, with art, it's not as defined as something like architecture or any other thing where, you know, you become licensed and maybe you do an internship and then you go into an office and then you progress up, you know, the totem pole or whatever it is, and it's a different thing. So what's the next slide? Oh, we talked about that. This is something that I confronted after having worked in architecture. So I graduated with a degree in architecture. I worked in the field for about 10 years, and I worked in all kinds of offices. I went to San Francisco, I was in Cleveland, I was in Portland, I was in Prague for a year, all doing architecture. And after 10 years, I switched to art gradually. This is something that goes back to, I wanted to bring this up. We talked about how one might do their art. And it occurred to me that there's this kind of this scale or continuum. I made 2 graphs for this class because I thought, you know, this is a professional, right, situation. So I got to put charts and graphs, or I don't know. I never do that.
I wasn't impressed, actually.
Yeah, it took me a long time to figure out that graph because every template that they had in there was too complicated. It's just like, I don't need that. I don't want that. It just, do you want to open this in an Excel? And no, I just want to, but this one I actually did in Photoshop. So, so this idea of doing art though, it's related and making a living doing your art. It's like inextricably related, I think, to your engagement with the outside world is what I'm calling it. So your art, for instance, there's on one end, we've got the kind of the private, and then on the other end, we've got the public. And what I've tried to do is put a few of these ways that you might be an artist and position them somehow along this. On the private end, you may have a studio that you go to. It's your own studio. You lock the door, you pull the shades down. Nobody knows what goes on in there. You come up with your pieces, you have your ups and downs, your breakthroughs, but it's all in there. You don't share it, maybe with only two people, maybe with nobody. And it's a very private thing. You're not very engaged with the outside world. That has ramifications as far as making a living doing art as well, right? And then you kind of go through these things and, you know, maybe you have a shared workspace. So you're with other artists, you see what they're doing. Maybe you open that up every month and there's some sort of art crawl, and all of a sudden you have the public coming in and weighing in on what you're doing, and you're making yourself more vulnerable artistically, right? I mean, you're in school, you're in grad school, so obviously you're not at the complete private end. You're coming in, you experience critiques, other people doing art. But specifically in relating, you know, thinking about this in relation to making a living, it also goes along with that. So, you know, you get to the point maybe where you're submitting work to shows, or you're trying to get into a show. Well, then you're submitting your work, so you're being judged. There's also an opportunity perhaps to make a living or start coming close to it, right? With each one of these things that becomes more public, there are opportunities to make money or a living. Grants, fellowships, gallery representation, teaching, private commissions, public art. And I tried to think of something that was completely like selling out, or like something that you could say was art related. You draw the same squiggle on a coffee mug, you know, 8,000 times a day, and maybe you're making good money, but you know, the art value may change too, right? As you're more vulnerable, as you're more out there, you're vulnerable to things kind of defining your art or driving it in some way. And some people don't like that. They say, I'm an outsider artist. I don't care what anyone thinks. I know what I like. I know my ideas. I'm going into my studio, going into my basement, whatever it is. I'm going to deliver pizzas, or I'm going to wait tables, and that's fine. They don't have anything to do with each other, and one's not going to taint the other. I don't have to be subject to this at all. Well, I'm here to tell you, or it's my opinion, that that's not so simple and not so pure as you might think. This is all assuming you have to make a living. If anyone out there is independently wealthy, then maybe none of this applies. So then I can't address that except say congratulations. But if you have to make a living, I would start looking, what I'd like to do is look at these more carefully and really examine them. For instance, say you're really that passionate about your art, that committed, it's that pure to you, that you are going to do it on your own. And you say, I have a great education, I've had experience, I have ideas, I know what I'm going to do. One day, maybe I'll break out and all of a sudden it'll be, you know, everybody will be seeking me out or whatever, or not. Maybe I'm just fed up with it and I'm going to be doing it myself. Well, in the meantime, you are going to be making a living somehow, right? So I would say that your time is being taken up with that, right? And perhaps that's time that you could be doing art. Not just, you know, when you get home and you stay up all night or whatever it is. And as you go through this, I think that you can do both. I think that it can become part of your practice, and it can become a part of your creative practice to have to make a living. and try to figure it out. Okay. And that's kind of what I want to go through here. Because I guess, here's the first time that this situation occurred to me, is when I was in the last year of college in architecture school. I was confronted by the professor, who was kind of a hotshot professor. Everybody wanted this professor. You know, the professor had a firm, was doing great things, and he would be known to offer certain students an internship, a job, right? And it was kind of an honor, right? You mean you want to work with this guy? So he approached me, and I was like, oh, God, this is great, because only the best students, right? But the deal was that I would be interning for him for free and working on this winery project. This was out in Oregon, in Portland, near Portland. And he said, it will win awards. It will be recognized nationally. And you can put this in your resume. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. You know, that's fantastic. How much does this pay? You know, because at that point I was leaving college, and I needed actually to support myself, like pay rent. And said, well, no, it doesn't pay. But the deal is, when this thing is built, this will win national awards, and you can use it. You can use it in your portfolio. And I'm like, no, great. But I was mad at the time, because this is not a paying job. I cannot support myself. So that was kind of the first introduction to that conflict. So that kind of started off, I think that same evaluative kind of, how am I going to do this or not? I still use that today. And I do that for everything I do. And so I thought the best way to kind of share this with you, or kind of lead you through my thought process in hopes that it might help you, is to try to kind of quantify this. So I wanted to just talk about these things, and then I'll show you what we'll do here. I think about creative energy. I think about financial, I'm calling it. I think about artistic development. I think about career development. For financial, you can just substitute, am I getting paid? What can I eat? Right? Am I getting ahead? Whatever it is, money. Creative energy is energy in general, but I think because we're all artists, I think all of the energy is generally creative. We're creative people. So if we're doing something, working, we're doing something creatively, right? How creatively, I don't know. Artistic development is truly, am I developing as an artist? Okay, not career-wise, but artistically. Like, am I learning? Am I experimenting? Am I discovering? Purely artistically, right? Not am I going to have a next show, but artistically, something, you know, I'm sure you're all on that path right now. Career development is pretty simple. That is about, is this going to get me to my next show? Is this going to do anything to advance my career? And there may be more, but I think these four are kind of criteria that I use all the time in evaluating how I'm going to make a living and what I'm doing. So what I wanted to do is I made a chart. This is the chart. Now, it looks very simple, but as I said, to get it to this point, I had to figure out how to eliminate so many different automatic formatting features and legend labels that I'm very proud of it. That's so silly, simple. And don't ask me what the numbers mean. They're just numbers, right? Okay. 8 is bigger than 2. -4 is less than 0. So the reason, I mean, again, the reason for the chart is because it looks professional and business-like, but it's also kind of this process that I go through and evaluate what I'm doing, everything. So how? Well, there's part of each one of these things: creative energy, financial, artistic growth, career step. Is it of no benefit at all? I'm going backwards. Is it beneficial? Is this not doing anything? Am I unsure? Is there an uncertainty factor in each one of these things? And then the green is yes, this is helping in some way. So that's kind of what we're going to do, and I'm going to take you through a few. I'm going to do two different things. We're going to do kind of some case studies of my projects. There's very simple few of them, but I'm hopefully going to introduce you to a few ways to make a living in art. And so we're going to start off with the juried art exhibit. And the reason we're starting off with the juried art exhibit, that's how I started off. I was always making art. I was making little found object sculptures, even when I was doing architecture. And at some point, I saw some call for a juried art exhibit, and I thought, well, I don't even know how I wasn't looking for it. Thought, geez, maybe I'll enter that. That sounds kind of interesting. And I took a piece that I had made, not for the art exhibit, just a piece that I had made in my locked studio, right? My little experimental studio that was all mine. Nobody came in there. I showed this to my partner maybe, and that's it. But I thought, wow, I'm going to enter that. So I don't actually have the call for that particular exhibit, but I do have a call that I just got online. This is going to suffice, and we won't read everything through it, but this is an actual call, and I'm going to kind of highlight. I don't know how has anyone ever done this? Entered a juried art show? Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, well, there's a lot out there now, and there are resources. At some point, maybe we can talk about them if you're interested, but there are resources where you can go and you can read these calls for juried art and submit something. And when you don't have any artwork, you don't have a portfolio, maybe you have a portfolio, but you have nothing on your resume or very little. A juried art show is a great way to build up a resume, right? You can't just go out and get a solo show immediately, likely. So you can do a juried art show. In this particular, show, I took screenshots of this show. It's called On the Streets, The Urban Experience, exhibit at MVA Gallery, Modern Visual Arts. And it goes on to, it says it's a national call. Artists, photographers, tells you why, what they're after, decisive moment, significance of place. Tells you about the gallery. It's in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. You're looking at this, submissions. How do I do this? Fees, okay. There's a $35 fee for 3 different images. You can include additional files for $5. Okay, well, what about who's jurying this, right? It's a juried show. We don't really see who the names are here. Not seeing a name, blah, blah. Wait, I'm seeing awards. Awards of distinction will be granted. Kind of hard to see on my screen because there's other stuff, but looks like a $450 place first prize, and then there's $250 second prize. And there's a grand prize, annual grand prize. Let's see, one artist is selected. A New York City exhibition opportunity. I don't know where, but it's New York, right? Okay, so what else do I have to know? Oops. How did I do that? Let's go back. So what do I have to do? I'm looking through this. I'm excited about the show. I want to win an award. I can put this on my resume. Got to ship the piece. There's insurance. Is there insurance or not? Don't know. Insurance. Will exercise reasonable care. The gallery will not assume liability for loss or damage. Okay, strongly encouraged, artists are strongly encouraged to obtain additional insurance. Okay. Commission on sales. Artists determine whether they wish to sell their artwork. 70% of the final sale to the artist, 30% to the gallery. Artwork must remain. All right, so that is the call. So for many years, this was my stomping ground, is the jury show, because I had nothing on my resume. And at the time, I wasn't as wise. I'm still not very wise, but I was less wise than I am now. And I did a number of these shows. Like I said, the first thing I did was the slide. All right. This piece here was a similar, this is a similar piece. So this is an early piece, indicative, kind of, this is what I was doing. I was taking found objects. This happens to be a big steel radial saw blade, which I stuck a 7-foot threaded rod through, and then I saw how I could wind thread and wire to generate a 3-dimensional form. And this piece I entered into a show similar to what we just read about. And I did this quite a bit. So I created this on my own. I did not create this for a show. High artistic development value here. All mine. Further explorations, color, 3 dimensions, all stuff I was investigating. I decided to submit it to a show. Actually, I submitted slides. Well, I paid an entry fee. I was accepted to show. Excited. Well, then I had to ship the piece to show. That was quite an ordeal. This is a big piece, right? Big plywood box, hundreds of dollars. Whoops, I have to get it insured as well. That's what they said. Who's going to be jurying this anyway? I don't know. But there's that New York exhibition. Again, this was a different show, but this is what I would be thinking. So just in general, think about it. You're shipping a piece, so what? You get accepted. You're so excited. It's maybe Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, but whatever, right? I mean, they did something in Bethlehem, right? There's steel, something. And it's a gallery. It's the MVA gallery. Right? And so, but think about it. I mean, this should be fairly obvious, but the MVA gallery is getting money. They're getting pieces shipped to them. They're setting up their show. They got to open the boxes, but they don't even have to worry about breaking the piece, right? Because it's already insured by the artist. They may have to pay a juror, although we don't really know who the juror is. So it's probably not somebody working at the Guggenheim, because that would cost money to pay them, but maybe it is. And maybe that's a reason to enter the show. is you can say so-and-so from the Guggenheim was a juror. That's something you have to weigh, but we don't know who the juror is. The juror could be the local librarian, I don't know, or the kindergarten art teacher, I have no idea. But you might win a prize. Well, I don't know how many people are in the show. I don't know what they're looking for. Kind of a long shot. What about the New York exhibit? That was kind of vague. Well, so what? I'm gonna be in a show anyway. Can I get to the show? Well, where do I have to fly to? Let's see, what does it cost for me to fly to Pittsburgh? Then I can rent a car, drive to Bethlehem. So all of a sudden, this looks kind of like a big expenditure out of pocket, right? For this show, which you can put on your resume, which is good. Is there some career development? Yes, it's good to have things on your resume. Maybe you'll make connections. Maybe you'll win a prize. Maybe the juror is actually somebody who's well known. Maybe the New York exhibit that you happen to win is quite prestigious. I don't know. These are things you have to weigh. Now, in the case of this, I actually won a prize, and that was exciting. And the piece actually, this show actually did have a New York thing. It was not that RFQ that I showed you, but it went to New York, right? And I can't afford to go to New York, right? So I couldn't see the show, but they paid for this thing to get out there to New York. Now, I was fortunate enough to receive a phone call. This is from the Museum of Arts and Design, which is actually a prestigious place out there. And the show hadn't started yet, and I was informed that somebody had tripped and fallen into the piece and damaged it, which sounds like a bad thing. I was kind of devastated but the good thing was that they said, we need you to come fix this. And we need to fly you out here now. And you need to come fix this. So I was like, I mean, really all it is, I mean, it's thread and the steel, right? The steel's fine. I hope my first thought is I hope the person's fine, because somebody tripping into the saw blade is a very dangerous situation, right? I mean, actually, that was my second thought. The first thought was about the piece, but then I was like, what about the person? Okay. So I was able to be flown out to New York with some scissors and I came with some scissors and spools of thread. And I had never been to New York City, and I got to see the city for 3 days. They put me up at a hotel. It took me about an hour and a half to cut some thread and retie it. And that was fortunate. Otherwise, I wouldn't have seen the show. I also was able to meet one of the curators there. So then there was connections made. That was unexpected. I never imagined that would happen. So, actually, the first graph we looked at was the analysis of that art exhibit, right? That whole scenario. There was artistic growth. There was financial situation. I think that's the analysis of it. There was a lot of energy. Most of it was well spent. It was a career step. There was uncertainty. You see what I'm saying here? It's not like I sit and make this graph up, but everything that I do is got to be weighed against this. Everything. Because you're an artist and you have this passion. And it's not just something you start entering data into. So everything you do is creative, and you should actually value that and not want to waste your time. If you can possibly do it. It's not always possible to not waste your time. But if you're making a living, it's more than time is money. Time is your life, and it's your creative life too. Here's another case study, another way, gallery representation, right? This one seems like a viable way. You get a gallery to represent you. They like your work. You have to establish a relationship somehow. And what does the gallery do? Well, they show your work. Maybe they show it on a solo basis. Maybe they show it with other artists that they represent, and they try to sell your work. And they have connections. They have clients. Right? It's almost like a realtor. You could go sell your home by owner, and avoid the realtor fees, right? But one thing that probably the most valuable thing the realtor can offer is the connections they have, the relationships. And that's not to be downplayed or underestimated, because a gallery has that too. Here's part of this case study now. Here's a piece, very early piece, 1998. Again, small piece. This is when I was exploring these found objects. I may have shown this last time I was here. It's a badminton racket. It was badly damaged in a house fire. I found it out on a vacant site. It was warped. It was really beautiful somehow. I removed the net, found that the bamboo skewers fit perfectly in the little holes, and then I was able to take some elastic thread and develop a surface, and blah, blah. High artistic value, right? At some point, I thought, at the time I was doing fiber work, and I pretty exclusively these small pieces, and there was a gallery that did contemporary fiber. They represented contemporary fiber artists around the world, and I just was in awe of this place. And I decided to take a shot in the dark and just contact them out of the blue, email them. I don't even know if email was around then. Somehow I just thought, I'm just going to do it, right? Just cold turkey, out of the blue, send them some images. Well, they liked what they saw, and they wanted to show a piece and blah, blah. We had a relationship. So for all intents and purposes, they represented me. So this piece, this is made privately, ended up going to them. That was the last I saw it for many years, and it sat there for a long time. They would have shows, group shows of the artists they represented. Sometimes it was included in those, sometimes it wasn't. Here's a page from a catalog. So this was a published work. They did beautiful publications, but I don't know how many people actually read them, but they're beautiful. And then just a little side note is I found this early time-lapse photograph of actually a badminton racket being swung, and I thought that's exactly the spirit of this. And it looks like that's what I was inspired by, but it was actually after the fact. So that's something you can do too. This actually was the piece that again, it's hard to see, but it's a saw. It's just a big, it's one of these open frame saws with a rod going through. This is something also that they represented. Because of their relationships, it made it onto the cover of this, Journal of Wealth Management. I had actually never heard of it, but as you can see, it's talking about, the stuff, variables, generators, how's the regression, multi-horizon investor. I mean, clearly money-oriented, which I thought was funny because this is a salvage piece and I was barely surviving financially. But there it was. So I thought, wow, this is the big time. Not necessarily true. Okay, so here we go. So that first badminton racket, I looked at this situation that I've been trying to get across here. Creative energy, that's all the energy I put into this one way or the other. Not just the piece, but communicating with them, sending it. There was some uncertainty. There wasn't a whole lot of money spent. They're on financial. And there wasn't a lot of creative energy that was just just energy that was just worth nothing. It was all pretty beneficial. Financial, never saw it. It's uncertain. I don't know if it's going to sell. There was certainly hope, but it was a lot of uncertainty. It was made in my own studio. It was high artistic growth. Career step. Well, these things were published. And in fact, beyond what this doesn't indicate is one day the things were sold. Echoed Surface, I think Echoed Surface was sold, or one of them. The other saw piece was sold for pretty good money. That actually outweighed the crate I made for it, everything else. What about the gallery? Well, they took 50% of it. 50%. So think about, I don't know if any of you sold your art or had to think about how much you would value whatever it is, a sculpture or painting, whatever. Well, now double it, right? And then it sounds really high. So, but this gallery has pretty elite connections, and somehow they made that work. Oh, here it is. Here's Saki's number 4. So it sold for a lot, you can see. It was pretty much a win. It was a career step, blah, blah. That's a good one. Another way, now we're moving on to yet another case study, another way to make a living, is a grant fellowship. Everybody familiar? Have any of you applied for a grant or fellowship? Yes, no, no, yes. Success? Yes. Yeah. Good. Good.
I get money one time.
That's great. That's great. Grants are great because, especially when there's money, right? Depends how you use the money, right? Sometimes there are strings attached. You have to do a project. Sometimes it's just exploration. It's your money to explore. So, if there is something attached to it, then the game is to do it and still have money that you made too, so you can actually live. It's also a great thing for a resume. There's not a whole lot of grants out there, right? And generally they're sought after. This was a grant from the Minnesota State Arts Board. This program's actually changed quite a bit in its form. That this is the original. I've received the grant several times, and so I decided to copy this off just so you can get an idea of what it looks like. And we're not going to go through it line by line, but again, we look through it and get through all the criteria, review criteria, and blah, blah, blah. And we see that, there is an artist plan. So this is a grant where you need to actually propose something, right? Is there money involved? Yes, there's money involved. At the time, there was up to $10,000. Up to $10,000 involved. So, but it's based on you having a project or some way that you are going to advance your career in this particular grant. They had it, that was their goal. So didn't necessarily have to be creation of new work. It could be buying a piece of equipment or, in this case, I see that, capital costs over $5,000. You can't have any funding at anything over $5,000. So there's some stipulations. And there's a whole process for applying for it. You've got to have dates for your project. You've got to have a project summary. You've got a project outcome. You've got to think this through. Is the underlying the underlying step here. So this is not the first one that I won, but it is a subsequent one. And I applied for a grant and I had an idea. So you can go to a grant and come up with an idea, that's fine too, or you can have an idea and look for a grant. This is a bridge it's near St. Peter, an old rusty bridge, and I was interested in wrapping, at this point I was doing things that were larger than the little thread things, and I wanted to develop space in a big three-dimensional structure. So this was a state arts board grant, and I knew it was $10,000. And I knew I was going to have to come up with a plan. So what I did is I put a lot of time into the proposal. And without knowing whether I'm going to get the grant. Now I thought carefully about putting too much time into it, right? I left some things open-ended in writing the grant, but I certainly had an idea of a budget and that it would work for $10,000. So I fulfilled, by the way, the State Arts Board grant was a great grant because it was so straightforward. For instance, if you really adhered to the conditions of, what you were supposed to show, demonstrate that this is going to, advance your career, demonstrate that this is going to be a benefit to, at the time, Minnesota arts community, blah, blah, blah. You were so dead clear about it. There was no subjectivity almost. There was very little. It was very well, we can't argue. He said that very clearly. Yes, we're going to approve it. So anyway, I ended up getting the grant in this case. And this involved, I had no bridge, right? So part of my grant was to research bridges and go around and find one that's ideal. So which is time and money, gas, lodging. So I built that into the budget and I found a bridge in an ideal location and it all fit the bill and everything else. And I found out who owned it, which county, and I sent out a letter to they had a county board, they called it. And I found out the addresses to every one of those people on the board and said, I want to be on, here's what I want to do. And I got myself on the board meeting, and I made panels and I presented this, and they didn't know what in the world I was trying to do, but they were impressed that it would be taken down at a certain point. That I wasn't asking for any money and that I had insurance. So they approved it and I was able to do it. It was called Passage. And this is how I evaluated it. I knew that I could, creative energy, lots of unknown. You see a huge unknown there, right? And that's all great energy. It's all work, creative energy, but don't know yet whether it's actually going to lead to anything or not. There was some that was no benefit. I don't know why that is right off the top of my head, because I can't, it seems to me that there was quite a bit that was beneficial in the end.
Well, you built 20 bridges, but only applied to one. There's 19 bridges.
That could very well be it. There were so many conditions that had to be right for that bridge, right? I mean, it had to be kind of in the public. It had to be accessible to me. It had to be within a certain radius because I had to drive there every day for 2 weeks. Lots of conditions. And then I had to be able to do it. I had to get permission. So there was a lot of unknown, and that indeed could be the reason. A lot of trips that came to nothing. Financially, I came out great, and I knew I would, because I also had a project before this grant that involves all that fiber and more. Well, not quite more, but I knew that I could reuse that fiber on this project. So I ended up making a good bit of money. And I knew I would, and it gave me comfort because I could, you know, explore this project artistically, not worry about like, should I be doing something else that's making real money or what? This was totally legit. Artistic growth. Totally. This was like a dream to continue to do these big structures, right? And I was being paid to do it. And it was a career step. Looks great on the resume. It's a very good thing. I wasn't sure, right? There was some that, well, the thing that's uncertain is like, what career step? It's on your resume. Is it going to actually lead to anything? I don't know. And the public art commission. So Andy, I ended up doing public art. That's what I do now. I'm a public artist, full-time. So I'm all the way on the public side of the vulnerability scale. Right? There's a lot of reasons I do public art. One is that it's exciting. I like being vulnerable. I like the controversy, the people. I like the communities. I like contact with the communities. I like the dialogue. But often it's not working in my studio, right? There's a commissioning agency with a lot of a preconceived concept. There's a site. You're working amongst different agencies, different designers, architects. Gets messy, complicated. There's a budget, a real budget that's already there. It's not speculative. It's a given budget. A project has a budget. A public project, usually it's a percentage of whatever construction budget that this project took. So it's usually, say, up 1%, which can be sizable if you have a building that costs several $1 million or tens of millions of dollars. Anyway, the Public Art Commission is hard to get. It's also a good way to make a living. So I think here is an actual a project that is an RFQ, is an issue. Does anyone know already about public art? I want to belabor the process here. People put out commissioning agencies put out calls. They're called RFQs. They're requests for qualifications, which means all they want is qualifications, references, resumes, slides of your work. With the idea of picking finalists to propose an actual idea for a project. Often, if you're selected as a finalist, you'll be paid for your proposal. So you do not give an idea, you don't draw up your idea without being paid. That's not all public art calls. There are public art calls that want ideas. They say, sure, you can enter this competition, but we'd like to see sketches. We want to see your budget. What's your maintenance plan? Well, they want to see it all. Okay, this is a real piece. This was for the city of Minneapolis. It's called Collection Point. For a public works facility where they maintain all the recycling, garbage trucks, street sweepers, all the vehicles. Huge facility. And this is just a smidgen of what you could. So here you go. You got. I thought there were more pages, but I guess not. So I'll just. The budget's on here. You see that there's a budget, $140,000. That's not a huge budget. Sounds like it. It's a great budget, but there are $1 million budgets out there. There are 500,000. There are budgets. You just need to get the project and do it. This particular one was issued by the city of Minneapolis. It looks like here the selected artists will be contracted for $12,000 for design work. Once the design is approved, the city will then enter a new contract for fabrication. So this is kind of unusual that they're separating out a design phase as a separate contract, which is kind of nice because often design is unaccounted for. Just somehow it happens, right? Well, it's actually a lot of work. So that's nice. It also means that in this particular project, there was no proposal that was judged. It was an interview. So they selected finalists. They paid the finalists to come interview. Very nice. Interview, everybody's talking ideas, no hard ideas, just some kind of sketch ideas. Once you're contracted, then you start designing. So the pressure's off. You come up with something and. All right, so this was some renderings of the thing, of my idea, taken from the proposal. Once I was already commissioned on this project. There's the real thing. Just happens to be, those are trash can or recycling lids that have been cast into concrete, used as forms to cast into concrete. I was intrigued with this idea of lids opening up and down across the city. And that's the point where the public works employees and the public, that's the actual literal point that they both touch and bump. So anyway, this piece was a win, all right? Because there was, the only thing you might see there is, what's the no benefit there? Well, I'll tell you what the no benefit was. There was a lot of engagement, public community engagement, which I like, but it wasn't defined. So what happened was that I spent, every time I did an engagement or a set more, somebody would suggest that I do more, somebody from the city, and I would kind of have to do it. And this went on for 2 years or a year and a half. And that was pretty, you know, if I would say time is money and blah, 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 then there you'd see a red mark.
Did they pay you for that additional time?
That all came out of the initial design.
Okay.
But it's kind of like being hired as an employee with a salary and saying, there you go, that's your salary, and then working you until 11 at night every night and saying, well, right.
Where is this? Where is this guy?
This is over in Northeast, so it's on University. You keep going past Jack's Cafe, it's right out there.
I know it.
Okay. But this was a big project, very complicated. Engineering, multiple engineering, materials testing, things I didn't know how to do. Nobody had done. Can this be done? Can you put 200-pound concrete things in the air? Is it going to crack? What weather? Lots of unknowns. So there was a tremendous amount of artistic growth. I believe it was a tremendous career step. Although there's no plaque as of yet, which is the city's responsibility. So no one knows the story of it. And so there's some uncertainty there.
When did it go up?
What's that?
When did it go up? Like
It
how
was
long?
in 2000, almost 2020, 2019.
Okay. And do they make you maintain it? Like what's their
No.
maintenance? No, they maintain it.
Yeah. So, and so that's always a very good question.
Yeah.
Maintenance.
Huge.
Huge.
Yeah.
Usually what happens in a public art situation is that there's a warranty. Okay, so it's usually a year if something goes wrong, if it's, you know, defective installation. But that is also, that varies so much. And now we're getting we're zeroing in on public art as a way, and that makes sense because that's kind of what I know most about and it's what I do. But agencies all over the place vary all over on what they expect and don't expect, their experience, do they have a budget for maintenance? Do they maintain things regularly? Does the person who works for the park just go out there and is it their job, the park person? It's kind of a free-for-all, and you need, and so when you put a piece out there, it's no longer yours. So if the piece is deteriorating, everything's deteriorating all the time. Well, that might not be a great career. There's some problem there. If your piece is deteriorating because the owner isn't taking care of it, it's not going to look good for them. It's also may not look good for you. That's something you have to kind of divorce yourself of in a way. These are the only case studies and the only ways that I've kind of outlined, but I wanted to definitely discuss and also, what does this all boil down to? For me, it boils down to constantly entering things, right? RFQs, RFPs. And do you think that I have rejections? More than you'll ever know. I have a folder that goes back to I don't know, 2005 I save every rejection that I have. It's massive. So it's a game of numbers in a way, right? You've got committees, and some are educated, some like your work, some don't, whatever. You're far over on that vulnerability scale that I should. So there's an emotion, there's an emotional part or an ego part to this, right? That it still gets me, but the only difference is I can get over it pretty quick and move on to the next. But as far as making a living, what I like, one reason I like to make money on a project is because it buys me time to get another project. It's like time. This is the game, right? For me, maybe there's other ways, I'm sure, but this is the way I've found to do it. So it means constantly looking for opportunities. It means constantly applying. And while I'm waiting to be rejected from whatever's out there, applying for more. Getting one, doing well on it, right? Hopefully the agency is worth working with. Hopefully they have their act together, and hopefully I don't lose my pants, because every art thing is kind of different. It's its own thing. So it's a very tall order too. You're coming up, and you're supposed to be growing artistically. That's what the name of the game is here, right? You're not just doing this so you can live, but presumably you're doing it so you can grow as an artist. So you've got to be excited and be interested. And your limitations are being put on you. So you need to figure out a way to twist them and make them your own, right? I do anyway, to make it exciting, or else I get that. I know when I'm starting to get that homework feeling like, oh, hey, this is a big pain. It's like, this, unless I break some rule or I make it my own somehow, right? And so that's part of your responsibility as well, even though it's the system out there, this loose system. And I want to ask now start talking and we can go further, asking questions, because
I have a question.
yeah.
So when you write your proposal, there is a budget part, right? And how do you calculate artist fee for your projects?
Well, I happen to take 20% of the budget. It's very simple. Okay, so that was $140,000, right? I take 20% of that. Right, so that would be $28,000. Right, 10%, 20%. But that's not really how much I hope to make. I hope to make more than that. But that is the untouchable amount. That cannot be touched. That the project becomes $140,000 minus $28,000, and that's what it has to be built for. And then I monitor that very carefully. If it starts impeding on that, or it looks like it's close, then I redesign the project. It's sacred. It cannot do that. If there's a disaster that comes up, right? Well, what if I don't make 20%? Well, that's a tragedy. But what if not only don't I make 20%, but I don't make anything? That's a bummer. That's a big, hopefully there's a lot of career advancement. I mean, it's not a good situation, right? Because how did I support myself for the last year, 2 years? But if I didn't make it, not only did I not make 20% or not make anything, if I had to pay for the project to be completed, that's unspeakable. That's not sustainable, right? Obviously. So that's very important. And that's the first item that I take off when I put a budget together.
Any other budgeting tips when you are writing your proposals?
Well, the budget at a proposal stage is hard, right? Because you really don't know. That's the problem. To really know, you really need a number, right? Where you get your number? Well, if it's you and you're doing your bronze thing in your own studio, maybe you have a pretty good idea of how much material it's going to cost, what it's going to cost to cast it, unless you do it yourself, how many hours you think you can do it, right? It's all in your control. What if you don't? What if you have a fabricator, right? What if you're proposing a light and you need an electrician? What about the structural engineer? You can't call the structural engineer and say, well, what do you think well, send me a drawing, they'll say, and I'll give you a price. You don't really have drawings and you don't have time to do drawings. And making drawings of that depth is a waste of creative energy. And it's financially unproductive. It's a waste in every way. So you have to make some guesswork. That's very difficult. And it's not, it comes with experience. And so the best way to do it is simple. I mean, my rule of thumb, I always come up with something that's too complicated, even if it seems simple. And it's just, if you think it's too simple, you're probably on the right track. That's what I would say. It's certainly until you get enough experience to know what something costs.
So we have another question. Victor said, what percentage is put in for contingency on overhead?
Well, contingency is a great idea. Often, a commissioning agency doesn't want to see a contingency when they look at your budget, right? Because what does that really mean? And I think that can go against you. I mean, some agencies might be smart enough to say, well, that's very smart. This artist is putting a contingency in because they know things might go wrong and blah, blah, blah. Others, less wise perhaps, might say, well, okay, so he's making that fee, but now he's also going to make the contingency. It's just something that he had to, right, add in there. And so I never put a contingency in my budget that I share. I put an artist fee. In reality, for myself though, there is a contingency and I can't tell you what that percentage is. It kind of varies per project, how complex it is, but there's a padding there that I know, right, that I do not want to get in trouble. Let's just say that. So
Let's add it to your artist fee, that 20% of the project.
what I do is I add the contingency onto individual costs. So I build it in. So it's as if I'm a contractor who's subcontracting out. So I'm actually charging my fee. I'm not just, if a fabricator is says they'll fabricate this thing for $4,000, I don't put down $4,000 in my budget. I put down $5,000 or something. And that in effect, that turns into a contingency, right? In reality, even if the fabricator fabricates it for $4,000, there's things I have to do. I have to communicate with the fabricator. I may have to go down there. I gotta pick the thing up, right? I'm overseeing it. So that's mine to make or to lose, but and I do that for each item as it happens. Same with an engineer, even though the engineer is the one that's engineering it.
So is that for you? So how does the materials budget work? Like, I know there's a line in a grant that's like materials, then you like can show a receipt. But sometimes that can be wavy. I don't know.
Yeah, if you ever can put a range and that's acceptable, then do it. Right? Because the fact is, nobody knows, right? The people evaluating your grant or your budget, they don't know, right? And you don't really know, but you have a better idea.
Yeah, and then afterwards, when they like want to see the stuff.
Well, that, if they want to see the stuff, partly they don't need to see the stuff. And if they do need to see the stuff, then they can see the stuff, but they don't care. They just need it for their state record or whatever it is. But it should have no bearing on how much you make. That's part of the game here. Sometimes you're going to make a lot of money and sometimes you're not. And that's part of the risk that you're taking on. You're risking, not making anything possibly, or making very little to get this project done, but you're signing the contract and saying, I'm going to do it.
You can make a thing.
And you got to make a thing, right? But you got to make some money too when you make the thing. And you may not, because the thing, that metal thing that you thought you were going to make that was so cool, it turns out it needs 5 other metal things to make it stand up.
Sounds like kind of like a risk on both sides of that relationship, a risk for the artist, to try to be profitable, endeavor and grow, but then also a risk for the commission, or the city or the public to trust you to take on that project.
Yeah.
And so I liked the way that you kind of showed a way into that game. Like how to build the resume in order for someone to take that risk on you. So here, this is why I'm trustworthy and this is why I should be given this opportunity. I really appreciated the way that you fleshed that out in your presentation.
Oh, thanks. One thing I would add to that is that you can feel free to bring that up because committees are, predominantly focused on the art, right? We like that. We like this idea. We like that. But they're not always aware of exactly what you just said, that they're actually entrusting you to follow through and produce, right? They're not, because that's no fun to talk about, right? Let's talk about what the idea is, right? But then let's hire this person, and then all of a sudden, this person cannot, like, they had great sketches and idea, but we're stuck, right? I mean, we can't get anything. And what are they going to do? Yeah, there's a contract and everything, but maybe they've already paid. It turns into a real mess. And I've really seen it happen. And they're in the middle of a contract and they've paid the artist tens of thousands of dollars. Nothing has materialized. The artist doesn't know, it can't take it through the steps, doesn't know how to communicate with an engineer, whatever it is. And there they are. And ultimately, they can cut their losses. And it's embarrassing, and it's a loss of money, and it's bad for everybody, the artist, everybody. So it is a big deal, and you could bring that up. It's not, it may not be sexy to talk about that, but you can introduce it in an interview and say, I can, see this through, because this is something that needs, on time. And I'm flexible. Things come up in anything you do, and I can work with that. We can change it, blah, blah, blah. That's going to give them a great deal of, comfort.
It seems like one of the proposals you showed had that built in. Maybe they got bitten by that process before, and so they say, okay, here's $12,000, we're on the hook for that. And if you can't produce or you can't,
Yes,
we can cut ties.
Yeah.
And we only lost 12 grand. We didn't lose the project.
that's right. And in that particular case, I don't know if it was spelled out, it's not spelled out there, but what they actually do in that situation, when they start a new contract, technically, they could hire somebody completely different to execute your idea. Right?
That's interesting.
It's interesting. So yeah, so they're kind of saving, they're playing it safe a little bit, hedging a bit.
Which can be kind of nice. You get $12,000 and someone else has to deal with it.
Absolutely.
But then there's ones on there that pick on your reputation as well, like, oh, this artist is executed. Like, it goes around.
But you did execute, you did your $12,000
It's still
project.
yours.
Yeah, you still get the money, but like, if you were consistently doing these proposals, getting them and not following through with them, that reputation will.
No, but just on that one where
Okay.
you get the
Yeah.
12 and then they can hand it off to somebody else.
Right, I'm gonna say,
Oh.
then you're not gonna get the jobs.
Much RFQ, they're really looking for, do you have a record of producing something of that size and scope on budget and on time?
Yep. That's all. it is.
Before they even entertain your proposal, right?
That's what they should, that's what they should be doing. Do we have time here?
We still have around 5 minutes,
Oh.
but yeah, we're here. So,
Are there any more questions in the chat?
no, I'm
Okay.
looking at them.
Yeah, no, keep going.
Oh,
Yeah.
just one more question. Okay. Are you asking for some, on their payroll to manage the project that can assure a smooth process?
Say it again. Are you?
Are you asking for someone on their payroll to manage the project that can assure a smooth process?
That's a good question.
Am I asking somebody on the agency's payroll or
I
whatever?
think that's what they meant.
That's a really good question.
Often there is a manager on the other side, on the commissioning agencies,
Right.
right? And you're interfacing with them. But they're not managing things like your process or your building, your fabrication, right? They're managing like deadlines, like, are you gonna be able to install it like this? Or have you talked to the architect? Right, their perspective is, we got somebody doing something, I need to get this installed, so I'm gonna tell them the deadlines that they need to hit. But it's not your in-house process.
Thank you.
What do you think of the new MLK statute?
I don't think I've seen the new MLK statute yet. Where is that?
It's just two pairs of arms hugging and from certain angles, looks like a piece of poop being held up by a hand.
Oh. I don't know.
It was a $1 million budget. and
What?
People are not excited about it.
Okay,
Some.
Yeah.
well, so here's the thing, I
Talk
can,
about that with public art, right?
two things on that, like that hit me is one, it's $1 million. So first of all, right, that's the one, just like one thing about public art, right? It's $140,000 budget, right? $1 million budget, right? It's $238,000, $238,714.23. It's always an exact number, right? What defined that number? Not the committee, right? Not somebody saying, well, we need the art to be blah, blah. It's not, it's defined by the budget. It was defined by other factors. It happens to be the budget. So from a making the living kind of standpoint, this is exciting because some people make, a cube of steel that's the same, that's highly polished, and there's a lot of philosophy into it, and it's reflective on one side, say, and it's that, and there it is. And it's got an art, and it is, say, it's amazing. This cube of steel is unbelievable. It's reflecting not only our world, but the world beyond. And I see it, right? It's let's just say it's highly artistic. Yet, what did it cost to make that, right? That has not so much to do with an art value. It doesn't all have to be gold or something. And maybe it is, and it has zero art value. Do you see what I'm saying there? So there's an indefinable quality that it's like trying to put a value on art in a way. But therein is your challenge to come up with something of high artistic value, not necessarily high cost materials, but high artistic value that works within that budget to the point where you are making a comfortable living, right? And that's exciting, right? If I can't afford to go buy a canvas and I can only paint on cardboard, maybe that's the best thing ever because the cardboard's dark and all of a sudden I never realized I could paint light on something, right? And that has nothing to do with the expensive canvas or anything else. It's a limitation that is actually, that's exciting. And that's what a budget is. And that's what all the committees and the people that don't like it. And then there's this it's all exciting because it's a puzzle and you're the artist, right? If you were the architect, you'd say, well, we need a bathroom on the third floor. It needs to be brought. And there's the programmatic issue. We can't, and it would all lead to logical discussions. And yes, you're right. Well, I can't, right? But you're not, you're the artist. And ultimately nobody knows. And they say, well, I don't know. He, she, they're the artist. Who knows? And it's your call, right? It's a great position. You have control. You're the artist. You have control of the budget. And if you made $80,000 on that $100,000 project, most people will say, more power to you.
Take a picture.
Yeah. You know,
How do you deal with that mentally? I mean, do you kind of put a piece out there and then put a wall up, or do you care what the reaction is to the piece? I mean, it may be popular, it may be successful, or it may not be to some people.
yeah, there's a typical, I've dealt with it. I mean, I always thought my work is it's not really political, it's just form and you know, maybe you don't really like it, but you don't have any reaction to it. It's just, but I guarantee there are people, if it's not the piece itself, it's the money that's being spent, it's the public, who knows, there's always something. And I didn't used to find it entertaining, but I do find it entertaining. I like it because people are actually saying something. I mean, it'd be better than people just walking by saying nothing, right? They don't even notice it. I'd rather have people notice it and actually talk about it. Like it's meaningful to them somehow. Somehow this has moved them to voice an opinion. But there's also a typical arc for a piece of public art, almost no matter what it is, that if it's not beloved right away, the longer it sits there, it becomes part of the environment. It becomes part of and before you know it, this hated piece that now we're going to take it down because it's sat there for 20 years. All of a sudden people are protesting. And they've got a nickname for it and this is the whatever, right? We've grown up, this thing was this, yeah, so we just love it. It's whatever it is. And it's beyond the art. It's about something becoming part of a community, which is fascinating, right? What does that mean? Is it like, how do people become? A lot of it is that they feel like something's been put there. And no, they haven't had any involvement or input, right? They have no ownership. They don't know anything about it. So that's part of the engagement process, maybe. Not saying, what do you want to see here, but involving them with the story of how this piece, the history of how this thing came to be and who's making it and what people did they talk to and what, so that it just feels more like it's part of the thing, of the place,
And that goes beyond art too.
Oh, yeah.
San Francisco, is it Sutro Tower, which is the like
Yeah.
triple antenna that's, and it like completely marred the landscape. People wanted to take a A-bomb to it. And then it wasn't in use anymore because of 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, and then they said, all right, we're gonna take it down. Oh, hell no, that's part of the landscape, we grew up with that, like.
Yep.
And all this, and there was cultural and artistic, you know, people saying you can't. No, that's part of, that is part of what San Francisco is.
That's right.
It's on all the tchotchkes, that's how we sell our key rings.
Yeah.
It's on the mugs.
Yeah.
You can't get rid of it.
So it's A04. Is there any other question, or we can just say goodbye to people online at least?
I'm really curious what the other subject might have been, if you wanted to share it.
Well, I was gonna share with you one that it was, I realize I share with these, mostly there are a lot of green, and I'm involved with one now that is completely not. It goes against my rules and everything, and it makes me mad, and why do I want to share? Partly to vent, but partly to share with what an example is, and that's what I wanted to share, you know, and I don't know if I have time to do it, but.
Why not? Let's go for it.
We see it.
Let us know where the failures are.
Yeah, we may never see it. I mean, that's part of the problem, but I would just say to you guys, really, I mean, your time, think about it. You're all passionate about art. And so you're not gonna be just going into your studio and then starting to think about whatever this is. You're gonna be thinking about it at night. You're gonna wake up in the middle of the morning. You're gonna be obsessed by it. You're gonna put twice as much work into it because it's art, right? And that's part of you, right? And so absolutely, for sure, make sure that you're spending your time wisely, right? And don't get involved in something that you're not. If somebody wants an idea, they need to pay for it. I don't enter anything except for this last thing that I just did. It doesn't pay for an idea, and it doesn't have to be a lot. But what does it mean when somebody says, well, we want a proposal, but there's no stipend, we don't pay anything? What does it mean? Well, it means we want something for nothing. We want to look at your idea. We don't value any of the time. Artists, it's just art, so we don't value that. And we'll get all these 10 ideas, and then we'll look at them, we'll pick and choose. Oh, that's an interesting one. Now that one doesn't. And they'll get ideas, right? Well, I like that. I mean, maybe we could have this person do something like that. And then I'm just saying, never do that. Never do that.
Okay, so never give ideas for.
Give appetizers, right? You can talk and you can write a paragraph and a letter, but don't make a proposal. I mean, you don't go to a lawyer and sit down and say, hey, can you just tell me like how you might defend this case or whatever? It's like all of a sudden the $200 an hour clock's running, right? Nobody does anything like that. I mean, you can't even call a plumber, right? I mean, because they value their work, we value their work. Artists have an amazing, if you think of like the mysterious part of component, it's a very skilled thing, and the actual skills to whatever you're doing. Painting, casting, I don't know what it is, but these are mysterious skills that not very many people have. In addition to the creative conceptual thinking and this is valuable stuff, right? There's no need to even defend that. So it needs to be valued. And if you value it, I guarantee people will value it. And in fact, if you value it highly, people will then, in turn, they'll come and value that highly. Why would you, they won't even want, who would want anything for free or, oh, I can do that. Oh, they're an artist. They'll just do it. I mean, they're used to suffering. I mean, they just love to do whatever it is, right? They'll be working for weeks on it. And then you will, and then you get involved with the next one and you'll starve for that one and you'll make it. And then you'll do it again and again. And you'll be in a cycle. Just don't do it.
Yeah.
Perfect. There is one last question. Do we have time for one
Yes,
more?
yeah.
So Alexis asked, how do you make material choices? Do you make smaller versions first, or do you have sources for finding material with the anticipation of weather and community engagement?
With weather, like,
Yeah, weather and community
community.
engagement.
well, materials choices, that gets back to maintenance, which somebody talked about, right? I asked the question to them, what is your maintenance plan? Do you have a maintenance budget? How often? Not to go back to this one that I just entered, it's a coastal environment, right? They're replacing a sculpture was just put up that's totally deteriorated. So the obvious question is, what is your maintenance plan? Right? They have no idea. They don't know they don't know the difference between stainless steel and Corten steel and powder coating. They don't, I mean, they're asking if, well, of course, somebody explained to them the Corten steel builds up a rust and oxidation layer. And well, how do we clean that off? It's like, no, that's the idea. But so how am I supposed to propose to the question, what material to make, right? Because I use a lot of color, which is a lot of paint. So somebody's gonna have to repaint it. I use great paint. It won't fade for a long time. But you know, if it's next to the ocean and nobody's doing anything, it's going to rust. It will. Everything's deteriorating all the time. So there you go. You need to know that. That's how I make a decision. Right? Am I going to use fiber? Well, unless somebody's going to get back up there, or I am later and re-sew it or whatever, I'm not going to propose it. Community engagement, I'm not clear on like how material, what is that? I'm not quite clear on that part.
Well, depending on whether people are touching it, let's say, like different.
Like interactive.
Right, yeah, I mean, I just imagine that depending on sort of the physical, like, is it a physical kind of community engagement, is it not?
When I say community engagement, I had envisioned like workshops or, you know, participatory engagement events
I think,
surrounding the work of art, but interactivity, engaging, like if the person is engaging it. Yeah, that's the whole thing. Vandalism, I guess that's engaging with it too. And is there, you know, active vandalism in the area? I mean, the problem is you can start getting on a track where, well, you can't do that because it's going to be climbed. No, somebody's going to take their key. I mean, you can't do it. It's like at the point where I'm going to propose just a flat piece of concrete that's in the, well, somebody might slip on that. It's like, okay, I'm going to rough it up. I mean, you could go down that road. And I know we're over time, but here's one thing you can do. If you find yourself in that position, if you find yourself with a committee, they're naysayers, somebody raises, well, what if birds, that could be a nesting, right? And I've been down that route too, because I use a lot of wires. Sometimes people are, what about birds? What about they're going to perch there? It's going to be terrible nesting and blah, blah. I mean, I've even contacted the Cornell ornithology lab for one part, like, what is your opinion on this? So I can then tell, but here's one way out of it. Look at what you're proposing, okay? Whatever it is, and all the possible things around it, and think about things that exist like that already in the world. Okay, so for instance, I used cables a lot at some point, and these cables came to the ground, and I did a rocket sculpture over there in Minneapolis where there's all these cables. Well, what about people? They're going to climb the cables. It's like, well, really? You think they can climb the cables? Yes, they're going to climb the cables, and they're tripping and all kinds of no-go, right? It's like, well, 20 feet away, there's a telephone pole with guy wires coming down right into the sidewalk. So has anyone ever tripped? Is there a problem? I don't know. So one way is I'm proposing here is to look at your piece and don't look at it as a sculpture, but look at things similar to it that already exist in the world, and do that before you even propose and anticipate that that's going to happen and say, well, of course there are, right? I mean, look at the things, look at the bean, right?
Yeah.
How outlandish is it to suggest this highly mirror polished, humongous thing in the middle of a massive urban center where people tour everybody right at level where hands are, milkshakes and lattes and people, kids, everything. Like, who would possibly okay that, right? Well, the fact of the matter is there's a cleaning crew. There's several. There's the deep clean that happens every, months. And then there's the once a month where people polish it. But that is part of the piece, right? Has to be. Or else the piece can't artistically exist as it's intended. Not supposed to be some scratched up, milkshake strewn thing. It's supposed to be this pristine reflection. And so we need to keep it that way. So we better build that in to the whatever billion-dollar budget we already have, So that's, how I would say to answer that.
Perfect, thank you. So I'm going to say goodbye to people online, and thank you so much, Randy.
Thanks again for having me.